So there's the famous argument between the Rambam and Ramban. Why is a person culpable and liable for his actions? Or if he does something right, why is he deserving to be accredited for his good actions? So the Rambam explains that because every human being is in the position always to make a choice, and therefore when he does the good action, the good deed, it was only due to his own initiative that he chose to do the good. So the good therefore is attributed to his own initiative. When he chooses to transgress, the transgression is attributed to him because he chose to transgress, because his function is based on his own choice. Therefore, he's fully responsible for his behavior. That's the Rambam. Nobody argues this. But the obvious question is, if the reason why a person is culpable or deserving for his actions, because it's his own initiative for the positive or the negative, when the Torah says, Hashem says, I will harden the heart of Paro, or at the beginning of Parshas Bo, Ani echbarti es libo, I've hardened his heart and the heart of his servants. Why was there any culpability and liability for the Egyptians from the sixth plague onward? He had no choice. That's the question the Rambam poses, and all the commentators speak about this. So there's the famous Rambam. The Rambam explains that choice is a gift. It's a gift which is now to the human being. But what happens if a person abuses that gift? Meaning, God's presence is so obvious in his life, and despite that, due to one's arrogance, one chooses to defy God. At a certain point, if the person is not worthy, Hashem will withdraw that gift. The person no longer has that endowment. The first 5 plagues, which God displayed his obviousness and his hand in existence, and Paro acted arrogantly, defiantly against Moshe, already the 3rd plague, which was Kinim, his own sorcerer said, this is not sorcery, this is not witchcraft. This is Etzbe Elokim, but yet he was not faced. Therefore, after the first 5 plagues, Rambam explains, Paro no longer had free choice. He had his choice withdrawn from him. Nevertheless, he's fully culpable. Why? Because why does he no longer have free choice? Because he chose to forfeit that choice due to his overwhelming, unacceptable behavior. It was his choice to no longer have choice. That's the Rambam. The Ramban explains that why did Paro need this internal emotional fortification or strengthening? A person who undergoes, here he's the king, monarch of the most vast civilization, and Hashem is coming forcefully and destroying his whole kingdom, destroying the country. You say that even though a person doesn't want to submit, but emotionally, mentally, you can't deal with the overwhelming pressure, and eventually you totally collapse. It's mental pressure, emotional pressure. You can't deal with it. So therefore, when he would send us out, it would be he has no choice. Not because he's agreeable to send us out, because it's a question of he can't survive the overwhelming internal, mental, and emotional pressure. God gave him the stamina, the internal strength to withstand this. It's as if nothing happened. So he should always be in a position to make a rational choice, because if he would have sent us out, he would have just succumbed to the pressure. He can't deal with it any longer. So it's not that he was really the tshuva. It's not that he recognizes God's hand. So Hashem wants every human being to be in a position to be able to do tshuva. So he gave him that inner strength, that inner stamina, to be able to be rational, to make a rational decision, to be able to do tshuva. Paro chose not to. So ani akshes libo, that I hardened his heart. It's not that it withdrew the free choice, but rather hardening his heart to give him the ability to be in a position to make a choice. So if he does tshuva, so he should have the opportunity to be able to do tshuva. That's the argument between the Rambam and the Ramban until this point. Now over here, we're speaking of post Borod. Borod, as we see, Paro reacted to Borod different than to any of the other plagues. He was so traumatized. Here, everything's being destroyed. Hail, we're talking meteorites crashing down on the country, destroying everything, and fire. And sound, which is deafening. After experiencing that, you understand, a person is so terrorized and traumatized, you can't continue. So even if Hashem would withdraw your free choice, you're like a destroyed person. Hashem, so here, even the Rambam agrees that Ani Hichbarati Es Libo is more than he no longer has free choice. Here, humanly, emotionally, you should crumple under this. How could Paro even be able to have the wherewithal to stand up against Moshe? Hashem says, Ani Hichbarati Es Libo. Even for that, I've given the inner strength to be able to say no. Why? As it says, so I should be able to place more of my signs in his midst, to bring more miracles. Because it's essential, we have to have 10 plagues. And after Borod, if he's no longer able to deal with it, and he sends you out at this point, the other plagues are not going to happen. Therefore, so it comes out from this plague onward, it's not, he took away his choice because he was irrational and he no longer had the gift of choice, but rather, in addition to that, humanly, he was able to deal with all the overwhelming trauma to be able to have that stiff neck not to send us out. This is what we see from here. Because the Rechaim HaKodesh writes, Moshe says, it's like beating a dead horse. What's the point? Until now, we understand. It appears he has choice. But over here, humanly, there's no way we can continue. Hashem says, it's going to continue. Because because I've hardened his heart, not regarding Mechira, regarding being able to deal with the experience which he just experienced. It's very interesting. I thought about this yesterday. We find in after Esav and Yaakov had met and then he separated, the Torah tells us the land could not carry both of them, and Esav went to stay Seir. He went to Mount Seir. So Rashi cites Chazal over there that Esav understood that if he wants the birthright, there's a debt to be paid. What's the debt to be paid? The Bris Bein Absorim. If you're going to be the heir and you're going to have the blessings, that means you have to go to Egypt. Your children and family, you have to go into exile. And you have to be subject to the bondage of Egypt. Esav said, you know something, I prefer to pass on the brachos, on the blessings. I'm going to Tarseir. Yaakov says, I'm willing to take the debt. Yaakov says, I'm willing to pay the debt. Myself and my family will go to Egypt. We'll pay the debt that Avram's progeny has to pay. Okay? And we went to Egypt. We paid the debt. And as a result of that process, it culminated with the giving of Torah at Sinai. We were the heir of Yitzchak. Yaakov was the heir of Yitzchak. We paid, why? Because we paid the debt. Now, what was the bracha that was given to Esav? Al Charcha Tichia. Yaakov had the bracha Kol Kol Yaakov. Kol Kol Yaakov is Torah and Tefillah. The power of the Jew lies in his speech. That's Torah and Tefillah. Okay? Esav is Charcha Tichia. We had discussed the other day, Cherev represents death. Therefore, if you cut the stones of the Mizbeach with a metal implement, the Mizbeach is not valid. So we're going to have this later. Why? Because since iron causes death, and the Mizbeach is life, something which brings death cannot in any way have any relevance to bring life. Therefore, the stones do not qualify to be used for the mizbeach, to bring atonement for in the Beis Hamikdash or in the Mishkan. Okay, that's explicit. When did the cherev is death? When was death introduced? Cherev was introduced after the Chet of Adam Rishon, correct? Till then there was no death. When Adam ate of the tree of knowledge, so what is the root of death? Punishment. It's the evil which is intermingled in the essence of the human being. It's a part and parcel of the human being. Because he ingested the Eitz Hadas, which was Tov Ra. When he was driven from the Gan Eden, why could he not go back? So I mentioned the other day, because it says there was Cherev HaMislahetes. There was a swinging sword. The sword did not allow him to go back in. What does the sword represent? That's death. But what was the cause of the sword? Why is there even a representation of sword? The sword represents the evil. That's Ra. That was an outgrowth of what? Of the Eitz Hadas, which is Ra. So Cherev is Ra. That's its representation. Esav, what does he represent? Esav Sonel Yaakov. Esav is the counterbalance for Yaakov. Esav is Ra. Yaakov is Tov. And therefore we find when Rivka was pregnant, there was all this agitation in the womb, as Rashi cites Chazal, that when she would pass by a temple of idolatry, she'd feel a jolt. Esav wanted to go out. And when she would pass the Shiva of Shem Ve'ever, she'd feel another jolt. Yaakov wanted to go out. There were two forces which are the antithesis one of the other. One was good and one was evil. And therefore Esav, what was the bracha which you see from his father? Al Char B'chotichya. When he saw that the way Hashem orchestrated, that Yaakov should be the one who took the blessings, the brachos, he says to Esav, Al Char B'chotichya, you represent evil, and what? And Yaakov is the Tov, is the heir apparent. Okay, that's Ra. Now, Esav is Al Char B'chotichya. And I made the point, Bilam was the one actually suggested and encouraged and enforced the bondage, which was what? Which was the Ra. As I mentioned, the Jews, we spent 210 years there, and the 4 exiles are only the residue of what we experienced, what we imbibed, which we absorbed in Egypt, evil. Okay? Now, the Torah goes out of its way to say, how was Bilam killed? He was killed b'cherev, right? What was cherev? Cherev is Ra, meaning what he encouraged and what he engendered and what he represented was Ra. That's how he was killed. He was killed with the cherev. The cherev is a representation of what his essence was. And that's what he wanted to snuff out, the representation of the Jew, that they should never leave Egypt. Because he had said originally, and that's what Balak told him, you originally said, no Jew will leave Egypt. So not only not one Jew leave Egypt, the whole nation left Egypt. And he made a mockery. Balak, when he saw that he couldn't get him to curse the Jews, he made a mockery of him. You pride yourself with this and this. You said no Jew will leave Egypt, the whole nation left Egypt. That's what Balak said to Bilam. Now we're going to speak about, what is the gematria of Cherev? Alan. Gematria of Cherev. 210. This is what I just thought about yesterday. Cherev is 210. Bilam, Cherev. Esau had a question. Yaakov said, look, you want the brachos? Pay the debt. What's the debt? 210 years in Egypt. That's the debt. The slavery, affliction, that's the debt you have to pay. Esau says, I prefer to take the Cherev. Esau took the Cherev. But his cherev manifested itself as the evil. That cherev encourages and brings about and enforces and perpetuates that evil. And that's cherev. His upper hand, killing, destroying. That was Esau cherev. How did we experience the cherev? Our cherev was 210. That was through the bondage. That's how the cherev manifested itself regarding us. How did we experience the consequence of the Eitz Hadas, which is Cherev? That was the evil which we imbibed in Egypt for the 210 years. We were subject to the dominance of evil over good. And what happened at Yetzias Mitzrayim? The 10 plagues. Hashem extricated ourselves. And he took us out at exactly 210 years because we wouldn't have survived it. Evil would have totally snuffed out good. So because we experienced the Cherev in that context, rather than the other context, therefore we are the representation of Tov rather than Chas v'Sholem Ra.